Awesome. Right. It is lovely to have you both with us. Thank you, everyone who is hopefully coming in now. I think I've set everything up correctly. My name's Jem. I am the editor, director, many things here at Journo Resources, and I am delighted to have two people here with us today for our second year of running this event, all about the FT's Paul McClean graduate trainee scheme. So first off, we're going to kind of go around the room, tell you who's here, and then we're going to dive into all of your questions. We've got tons of them that we've had in advance, but please, if you're watching live, please do pop them in the comments. We're going to keep an eye on those as we go, and we really want to take the time to answer as many of your questions about the scheme as possible. So first up, Adele, can we get a brief intro from you, please, as to who you are and why you're here to give us some advice?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Adele Jones. I'm the Editorial Early Careers and Development Manager, which essentially means that I look after everyone who is at intern stage right up to the grad scheme before they go on to become staff. I have been looking after the Paul McClean graduate trainee program for a fair few years now. And it's one of my favourite things that we do here at the FT. It's a great way to see some brilliant young journalists come in, but also the applications and the people that we meet along the way. So it's a really great program, and I'm really pleased to still be a part of it after all these years.
Amazing, and I'm particularly pleased that we've got Stephanie Stacey here with us today, who not only has been successful in getting a place on the scheme, but was one of our previous Journo Resources Fellows as well. So maybe I've stolen a little bit of your introduction there, but Stephanie, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well, please.
That's okay. Yeah, I was a Journo Resources Fellow in 2022, I believe. And then I started the FT grad scheme in September 2023. So I'm like a year and a half in or coming up to that. And it's been really great. I can't recommend it enough. I'm currently doing a rotation with the data team, which I've only just started. So I'm quite early in my data journey. But previously I've been on the tech desks and the markets desk, and both have been great.
Awesome. Well, to kick off, I think because you are the person with the kind of direct lived experience of this scheme, it'd be great just to hear a little bit about, you mentioned a little bit of what you've done there so far, but if you could just talk a little bit about what you've done so far on the scheme, what it's been like, kind of the day to day, so people can kind of get a feel if it's the right fit for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off with, I think it was 7 or 8 weeks of training. I'm not sure if that changes year on year. So Adele, feel free to correct me. But that was sort of training in all kinds of things, from like basic writing skills to what are financial markets and how to make sense of them, which was really good for me because I very much did not have a financial or economic background. And my first placement, which started after those 7 weeks, was on the markets desk, which I was very scared about because I did not know what a government bond was or many other things that were very crucial to being on the markets desk. But the training was very helpful, but also the team were very supportive, and it took a lot of sort of getting into it and starting to write it to sort of figure out what exactly was going on. I definitely had early interviews where I felt like I would ask a question and someone would say something about financial markets, and I would sort of nod and write it down and be like, we'll be Googling this later. But yeah, it was very helpful. And sort of by the end of, so that was about 5.5 months, 6 months, that placement. And by the end, I feel like I was able to have original ideas about stories I could do about markets, which was really good. And also, I think, a sign of how supportive people had been, because when I started, I really didn't know anything about the area at all. And it was really quite like exciting and helpful to sort of know for my future jobs that I could go from that to having ideas. And then my second placement was on the technology desk, which was one that I particularly wanted, partly because I had worked just before starting at the FT at a small, like literally 6-person team technology specialist publication. And so I was already interested in the area. And that was also really great. That was sort of broad range of technology, covering everything from my personal favorite coverage area, which is dating apps and the business of dating apps, but also like content moderation and cybersecurity. And then from then I've just started on the data team, which I'm sort of doing introduction to coding classes and hoping to develop data journalism skills of that kind. I'd already done quite a bit of spreadsheet data journalism, but I haven't ever done the coding side, which I'm still not very good at, but hoping to learn. And everyone else has been very helpful.
That's the beauty of these placements, though, isn't it, Steffi? Is that you can come with a basic understanding, and the teams all around you are often there to support you. And everyone within the newsroom loves this graduate program as well and wants everyone to succeed. So they're really happy to have, fresh people bringing what you can bring, and then be able to help you along the way with that. But I mean, often one of the questions that we get asked, and I'm sure this will come up, Jem, is that thing about going to markets. And I love that you say that, Steffi, like you kind of go, oh my gosh, my first beat is on the markets. It feels like, you're really a baptism of fire. But I think it's really nice, isn't it? I was talking to somebody the other day about doing that as your first placement was almost quite helpful, because you're coming off the back of that training where we have had market specialists. You spent time with Katie Martin, you spent time with all these brilliant people to be able to like guide you in. So it's almost like better to do it like really early on, straight off the back of that.
I think, and one of the questions, this is kind of related, sorry to jump in, is people always ask us about those placements, and if you get to choose, if you have any preference. So how does that work? Do you kind of just get assigned a bunch of stuff, or is there a bit of a preference system?
We have called desks, so everyone always has to do markets, so you're not going to be able to get away from that one, I'm afraid. That one always does happen, no matter how scared you are. But actually, I think the most, I would say, people who have done it and have done it quite early on are so relieved that they've done it. That actually helps the rest of your writing, and then when you go on, an understanding of the FT as a wider product. There's always a forum posting. With that one, it can be multiple things. We will look at what languages you speak, which can often be really, really helpful in those situations. Or it could be, we've got business needs somewhere, or that you've expressed an interest. So that one is there's a little bit more consideration that goes into that one, depending on your language levels. But then the others, we tend to go for an industry beat, so we can really see what you can do as a lone reporter, which I think is a really good skill to be able to see. And then there are conversations, Steffi, aren't there, about, ideas? Because Steffi said she was really keen to do the tech desk. And actually, I think only one other grad has done tech desk as one of their rotations before. So, we are really open to chatting about the interests that you have and the skills that you bring. As well, we've had grads before who've been really good at personal finance, so we've put them on there so they can really show what they can do there. But at the same time, it might be that we've seen something in you that we'd like to push you on a little bit, to show you that you can do that.
Awesome. And one final, I guess, question your way, Steph, before we kind of dig into that, into the application process itself. But just anything, I guess, that you have particularly enjoyed from your time so far, or that's really stood out, or even something that's surprised you. Again, just to give people a little bit of a feel of what they're diving into.
I think I have. Sorry, this is a lame answer, but I have enjoyed all of it. But I think one thing that I wasn't really expecting so much and was different to previous places I'd worked is kind of the freedom to pursue different types of stories and spend quite a lot of time on them. Especially
dating apps in the FT, Steffi.
Yes, dating apps are a big business, I believe, important area of coverage, but did have to pitch it quite hard, but it worked. And I've done like a long read on dating apps as well that I spent weeks on, which was really nice to sort of have that scope and be sort of unleashed to go out and find things and have that time, which I think is quite rare, to be able to dedicate that kind of just like time resource and also be supported in pursuing something you really believe in and you really think is interesting. And I think also another thing that has really pleasantly surprised me is the ability to sort of, even though you're on one beat and area, like when I was on the tech desk, you don't have to just write for one section. You can write about, like I wrote for some of our features desks about sort of how AI is changing how people operate in the workplace. I also wrote sort of about core tech companies, which was sort of my day job, but I also got to do some of those features. I read some books that were about technology and reviewed them for our books desk. So it's quite nice to be able to do just a huge wide range of things, even outside of your sort of core role.
Awesome. And you mentioned kind of outside of your core role there, and we had a couple of questions in advance, and I think there's a few that have come in on the live stream as well, about people who have experience maybe in different areas. So that's been across we've had this across a couple of different points. So maybe you both have something to chime in here. So we've had people who've said that they've actually got more experience kind of in the art space. We've had people who've questioned around kind of things like podcasts or radio, and whether those things are relevant and will be kind of touched upon if you were successful. So Stephanie, I don't know if you want to take that kind of art side of things first, and then Adele, maybe we'll come to you to talk about some more of those digital things.
Sure. So that this concern about having sort of lots of experience in arts and culture is something that I had because I had done quite a bit of freelancing, but it was pretty much all arts related. And it was actually something that they asked me about in my interview, and that I think I was really worried about. But I think the big question is more, are you open to using those skills to a whole range of different sections? Because I think the FT is a place where people cover a wide range of things and move throughout their career, even outside of the graduate scheme. So I think your experience is still valid, whatever you were covering. It's just your willingness and keenness to apply those skills to somewhere else, whether that's markets or, I don't know, anything else.
It's that idea of the news story, I think, isn't it, Steffi? Like, we get this question a lot, and I'm really pleased that Steffi's here on this call because actually that being her background, but the idea is that you want to be a news reporter and that you can go out and get those stories. So of course you're going to take the experience that you've had and getting into there, but we want to see that you want to be a news reporter and that you can report on those other stories. So it's taking those same skills, but this almost just changing the topic area, really. So yeah. Arts, background, absolutely brilliant. But we want to see then that you want to change this to be a news reporter, to cover markets, to work on a tech desk, to cover industries as well.
And in terms of, I guess, the digital kind of side of things, we've had a couple of questions around, is this specifically for written journalism, or are there kind of opportunities for those kind of more, I don't know, whether it's podcasts, whether it's, you mentioned that you've been involved in some coding and the tech kind of side of stuff, but, is it primarily for written news journalists, or does it go a little bit wider?
It is. At the end of the day, we are looking for a news reporter. However, we have got, as I'm sure, we've got podcasts coming out of our ears at the moment. We love a podcast. We love this. Our data teams are absolutely spectacular. So there's definitely room for movement in those. What I would say is, show that you want to be a writer, because first and foremost, that's what's going to get you into the door. However, once you are in, you will have, like Steffi said, you've probably done, I heard her on an FT briefing recently, it's all of those kind of things that you do have the opportunities to hop onto the podcast. They are very much everyone is involved in those. If your story is the story of the day, you are on FT News Briefing. If your story is being picked up by Life and Arts coverage, you are doing, the Life and Arts podcast. Similarly, you're going to be doing some of the broadcasts, you're going to be doing some socials on that, you could be doing some Q&As. So having that experience is absolutely brilliant, and actually something you keep in your back pocket and you pull it out when you need to. But tell us about it. We want to know that this is what you can do. So if you are a fantastic audio producer, you run your own podcast. If you've got spectacular data skills, oh my gosh, our data team are going to want to know about that, and that they can jump on and use you for that. If you are brilliant at socials, I'm not particularly good at Insta, which is why I'm glad that Jem is handling the recording of this and the live stream of this. But if you've got a specialism in social media journalism, then absolutely tell us about that, and then how you can bring that to us. And I'm sure we will tap you up for it. It's all going to be super useful.
Awesome. Right. Let's kind of dig a little bit further into the actual application itself. And we've had quite a lot of questions about visas and various different things there. And I believe you've got a special kind of dedicated place where people can get in touch with queries about that, right?
Yeah, if you've got specific questions about eligibility, so whether that is, your visa status, or, how long ago you graduated, which seems to be quite a common question, drop an email to graduate.journalist@ft.com, and we will answer, specific, people-specific queries on there. And we should have an answer for most of those things there. So please do drop an email, but please try and do it before the 13th, because the deadline is the 14th. I want to give you time to be able to write your application and your news story and get it in.
Awesome. Right, I've popped that in the chat, hopefully.
Yes.
So you should be able to see that. Maybe I have. You said, who knows? I feel like I'm falling apart with the Instagram live stream as well. But anyway, right, let's dig into this application a little bit more. We've had a couple of questions in for you, actually, Steffi, about just, I guess, what kind of experiences you'd had before the traineeship. So maybe if you could talk about that from your perspective, of things that you think might be helpful for people to have been doing or thinking about. And then Adele, if you want to kind of follow up there, because I'm sure you've had a wide range of people on this scheme before who've had all types of experience. So if you want to kick off, Steffi, then we'll broaden it out.
Sure. So I'd done a Journo Resources Fellowship, which I'd done a lot of online courses through, or like online webinars, and also written on the Journo Resources website. And aside from that, I had also done quite a bit of freelance writing, sort of a combination of paid and unpaid. Initially, I did some unpaid things and then sort of graduated a bit more to getting things commissioned by people that were willing to pay me, which was better. But I think all experience is good. And aside from that, I had done a 6-month fellowship at Business Insider, formerly Insider and formerly Business Insider, because they changed their name twice. But which was very helpful. And that was my main experience before the application, was having had that 6 months, just writing a lot and doing a lot of different articles. Those were the articles I talked about in my interview. But I think doing freelance articles was also, I mean, I don't actually know what they liked about my application, to be honest. I can't say
all of it, Steffi, all of it.
But I think that's something that I definitely talked about a lot in the interview, was sort of coming up with those ideas just off my own bat and pitching them. And I had sent in my final year of university and the year before. So I started the graduate scheme 1 year after I graduated from university, and I did this fellowship at Insider, and then I did 6 months at a tech trade publication, but I started that job after the FT application. So that was kind of irrelevant to my application because of how the times moved with things. But I think was just sending loads and loads of cold pitches out and getting some of them picked up, and then starting to have a bit of a relationship. I wrote quite a lot for the art newspaper because I had quite an interest in art. But if there's anything you have a particular interest in that you can pursue and just start writing about, I would probably assume that would be the best experience you can get.
Yeah, great experience. Exactly that, Steffi. And I think especially when we get a lot of questions about, what's considered a recent graduate as well. So, and what people have done in that year or 2 years since graduation. Does it make them ineligible because they've had a full-time job and those kind of things? So freelance, absolutely brilliant, because actually what you're doing is you're getting yourself out there, especially, if you've been particularly about arts. It's a really good way to get around things there. But, internships are brilliant. Inside we've had a few people who use that route. All kinds of internships are really, really good because it gives you that opportunity to see something in action, potentially in an office environment that you might not have worked in before, working with other journalists. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant. And not just, obviously the FT runs some brilliant internships, but you don't have to have come through the FT internships to apply for them, but there's some really, really good ones out there. Student publications, please don't forget how important they are. They're a really great ground for starting out, trying your hand at journalism. It might be the first time you've ever written anything for more than a teacher or a family member to see before. So they're really, really good, and all the skills they can bring you there as well. So we love student publications. You could have worked as a rookie reporter somewhere before. We're absolutely open to that. Because we appreciate that you've got to find your ground and build up those skills along the way. So you could be straight out of uni, you could be a couple of years down the line, you could have done a bit of reporting here, you might have subbed before, you might have been specializing in, I think you said we've got some audio journalists on here who when you're looking for that route. So yeah, a bit of experience is great, but don't forget to tell us about student publications, about how important they are. You might have done an NCTJ, which is great as well. And I've had a few questions actually come through to my graduate inbox about whether an NCTJ classes as being a professional journalist. Not under our scheme at the moment, so we're really happy to have NCTJ applicants and masters applicants come through as well. The one thing that we do say we'd prefer not is somebody who's done a graduate program somewhere else, because somebody else has then invested in you in that route. So yeah, come. You could be a freelancer, you could be an audio producer, you could have just done an NCTJ, you could be straight out of uni. Really open to it.
And I'm so glad you mentioned student media there as well, because I'm personally a big fan of student media, and I think that can give you an absolute ton of experience. There's a whole range there. It could be that you've done, it could be that that's the only thing you've done. It could be that you've worked somewhere else, and it's about, as you say, finding your route.
And the thing that's given you the bug to do this.
Yeah, I wouldn't have got into it at all without my student newspaper as well. So also shout out to student media.
Awesome. And while we're here, I think you've covered this already, but I want it to be explicit. We've had a couple of questions about, do I need a journalism degree? Do I need to have studied that? I don't think you did a journalism degree, did you, Steffi? No.
No,
So I'm guessing the answer is no.
no, and then we love a wide range of topics. So we just want to see your your core writing skills.
Right, I'm gonna get into it now. I can see we've had tons of questions on the live stream. We had tons of questions in advance about this news story. This is the thing we always get the most questions about every year, about kind of what kind of things you're looking for, what that might look like. Maybe to start off, Steffi, do you mind maybe telling us about what you put in for your news story and how you approached that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my news story was about a tiny airport in Poland that was right by the border with Ukraine and had become, over the course of Russia's war in Ukraine, really significant, which has sort of transformed it from like Ryanair flights mainly for Polish expats from this region, who live mainly to the UK actually, to like international missile shipments and like US presidents dropping in and out kind of thing. So that was I can't remember how I first found out about that, but I had done some work on the Ukrainian border because I'd studied Russian and Polish for my degree. So I had been to that area and I'd sort of flown into this airport and seen massive missile defense things, which is a bit weird when you're flying in a normal plane. But then sort of didn't really think about it. And then I just had like kind of become fascinated with how it transforms a small airport and the people that work there, who have like, interesting jobs, but not this interesting or not interesting in this way in the normal run of things. So I ended up writing about that, and sort of, yeah, just like trying to figure out how it had changed this airport and the people that worked there, which I also, down the line, I did actually publish that story in Business Insider, or like a version of this story about 4 months later after the EFT graduate scheme, which is a much more expanded version. But if anyone wants to look it up, that is available on the internet.
I think that's great. We get, again, Jem, I know you've had a lot of questions about this. We get this quite a lot as well. I think people worry about what their topic should be. So Steffi, being open, telling you about her story there, it can show that it can be quite like a niche subject, that it was just something that she had seen and wanted to see more of, that you worked into this bigger international picture. And especially at the time you were writing it, Steffi, it was so relevant to what was going on with the Ukraine war and things like that. But it can even be, you could even just go for the massive topic of the day. You could want to write about AI. You could want to write about Trump. It can be those, but it's you bringing your original take on that. It's you adding something to the conversation. So whether that is that you've got a different angle on something, or you have a source who is willing to tell you something that hasn't really been told, a story that hasn't been told. In previous years, I mean, Steffi's is probably the most niche one on that kind of scale over the last couple of years. But everything from infrastructure, climate change, renewable energy, crypto, of course, was a big feature, particularly a couple of years ago. So it's not necessarily that the topic itself has to be new but it's your angle on it. But if you can find a story like Steffi's, then I think that's absolutely brilliant, because they're the stories that get remembered as well. Crypto, someone's wrote crypto, someone's written about AI. You go, oh, but what about that story about that Polish airport? Those kind of things. So try and have a bit of a thought around that when it comes to your topic as well.
And people often ask us around, I can see a few in the chat already, around kind of like, is this topic okay? Is that topic okay? Or is it more about thinking about the FT's audience? What would you kind of advise when you're kind of thinking, oh, I've got maybe 3 or 4 different ideas. What am I picking? Or how am I going to treat that?
Exactly that. Think the first and foremost, just think about. We used to use the phrase "pertinent to FT readers," but we've cut that line this year. But again, you've got to think about our readership. So whether that is, you might have an FT subscription, you might not. Have a look at our homepage. See the kind of stories that are doing well, that we're pushing up that homepage. Look at us on socials as well, because sometimes you can get some of our stories through there that might be behind the paywall. Just have a look at the broad range of topics that we're covering, but try and keep at the hub of that. The people who are looking at this are looking for news journalists. So one, always make sure it's a news story. Please don't sway into opinion. It's really easy to do, but really that understanding is probably the number one as to what's going to make you cut out of that if you've gone, down the opinion route. But also just think about the people who are going to be reading this. So it's going to be a broad panel of FT journalists. But at the centre of that, it is going to be business, finance, politics, somewhere along that, foreign affairs. Those kind of stories are the hub of what you're going to see on on the homepage. So, if it falls into those, whether that's a broad into that, or it is purely a spot on finance story, anything that kind of fits under that umbrella, or that you can tailor to fit under that umbrella. Listen, if you're an arts writer, that's absolutely wonderful. And like Steph was, you've got that in the background. I would probably avoid arts for your article piece, but of course use it as your supplement pieces and what you've written about, because we've got a brilliant arts team, and that we have internships and things for. So there is another route into arts journalism at the FT. I would say, looking at the panel and looking at what we're going to ask you to cover, you're probably going to want to look at those kind of broader FT topics.
Very brief tip is that if you are still at university, a lot of universities do pay for FT access as part of so look that up, and then you can have a proper deep dive into, speaking as somebody who's currently doing an MA and is trying to get every benefit out of it absolutely possible. Anyway,
university badger them to be, and we can get them set up.
Exactly. And then I guess two final questions on this before we move on, because there's other parts of the application as well. But we had this question a couple of times last year as well, so I do want to ask this. But people often tend to be a little bit worried about how to approach sources for this sample story, because obviously it's not necessarily being published anywhere. So Steffi, how did you approach that in terms of, because you are also expecting, Adele, that they will have gone to speak to people, right? This is a news story which needs some kind of sourcing. So what kind of level are we talking, and how did you approach reaching out to people?
I think for that, the main thing is to be honest with people, because I've generally found it often feels awkward, especially if you're saying, this is for an application. I get that it feels really awkward. I felt really awkward about it. But I think it's similar. Be open with people, and most people are nice. It's also what I found. So I wouldn't be too worried about how people will react. But another thing that I would also say is, I think this is similar to if you are approaching a freelance article, or even just an article that you don't know will be published. If you're just doing research on something, I think you should always be honest with people about whether it's, that you don't know that this is going to be published, that you can't guarantee that. But I also think if your story is a good story, there's no reason why it can't eventually be published. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't feel, oh, well, if someone's going to tell me something really important, but why wouldn't they tell it to someone else? You could still make it work down the line. I think it's not a waste to speak to people anyway. I don't think you should think of it that way. But I also think just being open throughout the process and being there is no guarantee this will ever come out. But I also think, down the line after the FT application is done, if you still think you have a good story, I don't see why you shouldn't try to do something with it.
Well, you're a shining example. You got it. Yours.
I'll put mine in Insider.
We do timestamp as well. So at the time that you apply, it is made a note of at the time of apply. Because actually, if you are writing about a story which is moving, you could be writing about Ukraine. You could be writing about the inauguration. We understand that today being the 9th of January, this story, by the time our judges are reading this on the 29th of January, may well have moved on. Even perhaps, the key figure you're talking about may no longer be in power, those kind of things. So we do timestamp them. So, and that is for that reason. One, to make sure it was timely at the time of being written, but also to give you that opportunity to go and send that off elsewhere. A few other journalists have done exactly that. I think Rafe, who was your fellow grad, similar with him, his piece was ended up printed, but once it had been developed, once he's had more time to spend on it, once he could use other resources and things like that. So yeah, I think that's a really good way of approaching it. And you're right, Steffi, just being honest with people. And it does feel a bit, but like you said, with your experience in freelance, and perhaps, some of the audience haven't delved into that. That is essentially what you're doing all the time for freelance, isn't it? You're saying, I don't know this will ever get published, but I am working on this story.
Awesome. Right. And I know we've basically got about 10 minutes, so I know we have tons of questions on this, but we'll come
back. Do you want us to do quick fire now then, Jem? Do you want yes, no?
It's more just I think it would be great to get a sense of the other stuff that comes in as part of that application as well, because it obviously is super important that you think of a great idea and you put some, you put effort into that, but that isn't the only part of this application process. So Adele, I don't know if you could give us a little bit of a run through of kind of what else you're asking for, both in that original application and, what happens next if you get to the next stage.
Yeah, of course. So obviously CV, make sure it's clear. don't go too fancy with your fonts and stuff. Just keep it really good, really readable. We're going to be looking at this on different apps and publications. So, stick to a really readable format. Check for typos. I know it's a basic, but the amount of times that does, factor into this. And we get hundreds of applications. So a typo will get you cut from this process. Cover letter, really make that the point where you can tell us about yourself. We can read your CV, so we know where you went to uni, we know what jobs are, but if you can use your cover letter to really tell us what would make you brilliant for the FT, what you would bring, perhaps even something that you've worked on that you're really proud of, or a skill that you want to just tell us a little bit more of, because perhaps you've written about your data skills in a small line at the bottom of your CV, but you will really want to be able to tell us what you can do with those data skills. So really use that as a way to tell us about you. What was the other part to that question? The application and how long the application process takes. So the deadline is 23:59 on the 14th of January. Please, for my blood pressure, don't all of you leave it until 23:59 on the 14th of January. That would be great. So the first round, you will be told at every stage whether you have made it to the next stage. So we have a panel of 8 brilliant senior journalists here at the FT, 2 of whom are former grads, 1 of whom interviewed both of those former grads to become grads. So it shows that real, wealth of experience that's on the panel. They will read all of it. After I'll do an initial sift just to make sure everything's in order and everyone's submitted everything, all looks good. You will then find out mid-February whether you have made what we call the long list. So that is essentially where we look at all of them and then we cut it down to about 120 that we then take away, and then the whole panel reads those as a whole, in real time as well. We then will probably have an idea of our shortlist from that in March, and that is where everyone has read all of those 120, and we make a selection there where we then dig deep and really talk about those. You will be asked to do an edit test or a writing test at some point. Usually, I don't know if this worked in your year, Steffi. One of the years we went the other way round. We did the interview, then the edit test, but I think we will switch it back to edit test first, which will be under timed conditions, all online under timed conditions. Usually takes about an hour and a half. And then from that, we will select 10 people to come in for panel interviews. They will usually take place in April. And that is 2 rooms, 4 of the panelists in those rooms. One of those rooms will be talking about yourself, why you want to get into journalism, what you'd like to do in journalism. The other will be about the story that you wrote. So that's why Steffi said they went in hard on, why did you choose this story, and all of that kind of thing. So really come prepared to refresh yourself with the article you read if you get to interview stage. From those 10, we get it down to 5 who come in and meet the big boss, Rula Halaf, and you have a half an hour interview with her. So we hope, so it's quite a long process. So, you've all applied by the 14th of January, but I think we try to make the offer in early May. So it's quite a long process, but, all your applications are being read. So there's none of these, it's not going through some kind of reader somewhere and we're ditching those. Every one of your applications will be read by at least 2 people.
I'm really glad you said that, because I was going to ask you this, because you mentioned this last year, and I think that is reassuring is if you are putting time into this application. I think it is one of the things that makes the FT scheme stand out for us, and that's why we're so pleased to be able to do these chats with you, because it does get read by a person. So I think that's also extra impetus to really put your all into this and give it enough time. Steffi, from your perspective, I'd love to know what you did to prepare at each stage of this process. So both for that initial application, what were you doing to kind of prepare for that? And when you got further through, what additional things were you doing there to give yourself the best chance?
So for the first application, I think most of my time was on the article, which I don't think I knew for sure at the time, but I think in hindsight, that was definitely the right choice, because I think that's the main thing. And then, so I dedicated most of my time to that, and then cover letter. I think the main thing I did in my cover letter, which I ended up talking about quite a bit in the interview, was including basically the 3 stories I had previously written that I thought the FT would like the most, that I thought were most FTE. and sort of talked about how I would have written them if I was writing for the FT and had, like, I don't know, more time and resources to dedicate them. I was like, this is, you know, I wrote this, but for you, I would have done it even better, kind of thing. And then for the next rounds, so for the panel interview, my edit test was like right before. So one thing that I didn't do that I kind of wish I had done is remember what I wrote in the edit test, because they asked me about what decisions I'd made at each point during the writing process, and I was like, what did I write? Because it was about a week before, but it was fine. Like, I had it in the back of my mind, and they sort of gave me a copy of my own article for me to be like, that will be why I did that. But for preparation for that, I think the main thing was just reading a lot, reading the FT. I bought the print copy for like the week before, which I will say is, like, you know, I think if you have free access through your university or anything, like, it's definitely worth reading the print copy if you can, but I also appreciate it is quite an expensive newspaper. So it's, you know, I think it's a valuable experience, and it's definitely a good newspaper.
And treat yourself to an FT weekend, huh? Oh, very
yeah,
nice.
an FT weekend. Like, it's a very nice newspaper, but if you can't do that, then I would try and find, you know, what articles you can read, and at least look at the website in detail and see if you can get a month subscription or something to the website in advance if you're going to interview, because you'll want to, you know, say what your favorite article was the day before your interview, or just know, you know, who you most admire at the FT. I ended up talking quite a lot about our AI editor, Madinita Murgia, in my interview, because I was a huge fan, and I was on her team for my last placement, which was amazing. Except for my first day, I sort of just stared at her. I was like, she's very lovely. She's very cool and very lovely. But I think, you know, just knowing that kind of thing about the publication is kind of key coming into the interview, because they want someone who, you know, knows what they want to do and who they want to learn from.
Yeah, libraries also, you can go to your local library and they have free copies for you to read while you're there.
That's exactly what I was about to say, because, you know, I'm all here for the free hacks entirely. Most days I'm trying to work out how I can get them for free. You know, so when you're looking through these, Adele, obviously you and your kind of team, is there anything in particular that we've had loads of people ask, you know, what will make people stand out, or what common mistakes do people make? Are there any kind of just general tips you'd give in terms of any part of that process to help you stand out, or things you see where you've mentioned typos already, for example, but anything where you're like, try and avoid this because this is going to harm your chances?
Yeah, I mean, some's quite a good idea, especially if it's, you know, quite an important application like this one. Ask somebody else to read over it for you ahead of sending. You know, it can be just, you know, whether that's a friend, or, you know, if you're still at uni, if you can get one of your teachers to look over it as well. I mean, that's a great opportunity. Okay, so a slight pet peeve, I guess, that I have in cover letters when people spend too much time telling us how great the FT is, because actually you've got one page to tell us about you. So by all means, tell us, you know, that you love Madhu's pieces and things like that, but really utilize that cover letter to tell us about you, and the experience you have, what you'd like to do. That's always there. Sometimes the cover letters that really stick out are the people who tell us what they'd like to do in a few years' time, what stories they'd like to be telling in a few years' time as well. You know, whether they're really, you know, they want to be news, but you know, they've got this real passion for climate reporting and that kind of thing. I think that's a really nice way to tie up what you've been doing. What else would I say? Yeah. Type it. Please spell McClean right. It's M small c big C. We get that quite a lot in applications. Yeah, and just look at your formatting. That can also be a bit of a one, you know, if it's a bit squiffy. Yeah, and try to stick to the word count. We do say 500 words for your article. That doesn't include the headline. If you'd like to give a headline, that's great, you know, but that's also something you can talk about later. So yeah, just try and stick to those rules. AI, we've got, I won't go into it now, but we've got a bit of a policy that we've written on the application page about the use of AI. We do not use AI for reporting. Rula is very firm on that, isn't she, Steffi? She makes sure we're all very aware of that. I mean, why you would do that for an application when for a job when you want to be a news reporter would be a concern anyway. So I'm sure you all wouldn't do that, but do just have a quick look at our AI policy on there as well.
Awesome. Right, we've got a few minutes left, so we're now going to go to quickfire, as you mentioned earlier, just to try and get through as many of these things that people are asking us at pace. Some of these are quite easy, I think. So, if your application is unsuccessful, can you apply again in the following years? So, if someone's applied
Yes.
before, great. That was easy. When the career, sorry, what is the career progression when the scheme ends? I think you've talked about this before and that you're hoping people will stick with the FT, but maybe you
Mm.
could talk a little bit about that because the salary also progresses as you go through as well,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So it's outlined on there: first year 30, second year 34, and then with the aim to, by the time you finished your third year, you're what's known as a fully fledged professional journalist at the FT, which I think is 41. I think. So you go on to that kind of progression. But yeah, it's our grad program is just so loved within our organisation that people have just gone on to do brilliant things. And Stephanie, I think probably during your time with each of the people that came into your training session, at least one person had previously been a grad and things like that. So people do tend to stay. But I think the beauty of being at the FT and doing that is you don't stay and do the same job. We're really open to that kind of career path, kind of changing. One, as your interests change. Two, as your skill sets change. And three, as your life changes. You might be, wanting to be out there as a roving foreign correspondent in your younger days, but then life brings you back to London or to those places for those jobs as well. So really, really open. So I think we've got a pretty good hit rate that people are still with us, including, I think we talked just before this about Andrew Hill, who was our second ever grad, who is still at the FT now, is a big, big name at the FT. Our news editor, Tom Braithwaite, was a grad. Our world news editor, Alex Barker, was a grad. Our UK news editor, Kadim Shuba, was a grad. So yeah, these roles are all out there. But you don't have to stay. We'd love you to stay. And others have gone on to do some lovely things at other organisations. Some have gone down art, some have gone into broadcast, some have gone into politics and things like that. So, yeah. But the idea is,
And we've
that
had a
we're
question.
training.
Sorry, cut you off there. And somewhat again, back to this news story, just two final questions on the news story. One person's asked that in previous years, you needed to add some words about the reporting process. So you still need to do that. And we were talking about how it's time-stamped when you put it in. But, could it be a former unpublished story that was previously relevant, or would you like it to be kind of timely at the point it was submitted?
I think fresher the better, I would say. But I mean, if it's something that what we're not looking for is we don't want this to be an article that you wrote back in May and you just keep submitting to different publications as your best work. We'd like it to be newsy at the time of application. So I hope that kind of helps with that one. We have taken away the element insofar as we this year about telling us about the 200, I think we did 250 words about why you chose the subject. But we will ask you about that during the interview process. So have an understanding of why you chose that and be able to tell us about that. But no, this year we've taken away the requirement to tell us at application stage why you chose that topic.
And is there a word limit or kind of a recommendation for that cover letter as well? Like how long are you typically looking for there?
I mean, Jem, you see a lot of cover letters as well. I like them at a
I
page.
do.
I don't know about you. I think if
Yes,
you start
good.
going longer than that, you get into the realms of, and then this happened and this happened. If you could, and we want you to be a journalist, so we want to know that you can self-edit as well. So, if you can keep it to that page, that's it. I mean, if it goes over a little, but yeah, I'm not wanting to see 2, 3, 4 pages.
Right, I'm going to ask you two final quick fire questions, and then we'll round up with give you both time to think of what your final tip would be, and then we'll draw to a close. We've had a question about whether there's kind of opportunities within the scheme to kind of go abroad with the FT, and I didn't know if that's something that previous grads have done, or if there's anything you could add there.
Well, that's going to be on your next agenda, isn't it, Steffi? Is working out your foreign posting. So yeah, there is a 6-month foreign posting as part of the program, and then afterwards, of course, you are open to apply for any jobs that we have at the FT, and whether they are here in London, in New York, or in our wider. Our world coverage. I mean, I think we're still one of the largest applications with the most journalists abroad. So yeah, join.
Awesome. And then final quick fire question, and then we're going to take a tip from you both to leave everyone with. But you obviously mentioned about the number of graduates we had. How many people are you typically making offers to a year?
Oh my gosh,
I know you hate it when I ask this question.
I know, because it's such a. I mean, I think it's probably because why we go into such detail with this. We do actually only offer 2 graduates per year, which is why we can go into that brilliant 8 weeks training at the beginning, which is why we can then make sure you have these excellent experiences on your 6-month rotation. So it seems like quite, oh my gosh, hundreds of applications to get it down to 2. But boy, is it worth it, Steffi?
Yeah, I think it's worth it.
And as you mentioned, there are lots of other opportunities with the FT throughout the year as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, even if you put your all into this and it doesn't quite get there, you know, there are tons of paid internships that, you know, I think a few of them have just finished for the year, but, you know, keep your eye out on both us and Creative Access and on the FT site. This isn't the only opportunity and the only way in, especially at entry level. Right. Who wants to go first? I'd just love a rounding up tip as something that you would say for someone who is just about to embark on that application. Steffi, let's go to you first. What would you leave people with?
I think probably just like being open to the whole range of, you know, news reporting and having that interest in news reporting and in finding a story wherever it is, whether like, you know, being willing to and being keen to like be directed to a certain area and figuring out what's going on there, even if it's not something you knew about before or even knew you had an interest in.
Adele, how about you?
Tell us about yourself, you know, tell us why you would be great at the FT. I mean, that's what the hub of this is going to come down to, you know, that career journey that you have, what you see yourself doing, you know, really use that cover letter to tell us about yourself and think about your article. Some of our panel will read your article before they read anything else about you. So really do something to make that brilliant.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for your time. This has been great. If people, you did mention earlier there was an email address if anyone has any specific problems. Would you mind just giving it a shout out again, just in case anyone's got any niggles that are quite important that they didn't get answered?
Of course, graduate.journalist@ft.com.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all so much. Good luck, everyone, with your applications. Do get in touch if you do have some problems over there. We've got tons of resources on the Journo Resources website as well. But other than that, yeah, good luck. Good luck reaching out to your sources. And thank you both so much.
Thanks, Jem. See you later, Steffi.
Bye. Thanks.